Good evening and welcome to News Review. The Chief Minister this week told GBC that ad hoc talks may not be possible in this term of office because of the electoral timetables in Gibraltar, the UK and Spain. Without being drawn into internal Spanish party politics, Fabian Picardo speculated on the possibility that in the event of the Partido Popular losing the Spanish election, ad hoc talks may not happen at all because they could be replaced by a return to the Trilateral Forum for Dialogue.
Mr. Malgado said in Gibraltar there are electoral considerations, but we're coming to a stage where there are elections in the United Kingdom, there are elections at many different levels in the Spanish hierarchy of politics, and there are going to be elections in Gibraltar at some stage. I think that it's not electoral considerations that are likely to mean that we can't progress much with ad hoc talks. I think it's electoral timetables. People would just be out campaigning and doing other things, and therefore it's very likely that we are going to now not really see what can happen in relation to this alternative process of dialogue until the results of general elections come in across the board, because of course the Socialist Party have confirmed in Spain that they continue to be in favour of the trilateral process. The United Kingdom Parliament is united on that, the Gibraltar Parliament is united on that. So the only Parliament that has not been prepared to allow its government to progress with the trilateral established forum is the Spanish Parliament, and representation there may be very different after a general election. It's a matter for the people of Spain. We don't interfere with who makes up the government in Spain, but the results of that election may lead us back to the trilateral table where the United Kingdom and Gibraltar have been waiting for Spain now for 3.5 years.
Also this week, the GSD condemned an article in the Abitha newspaper as irresponsible and inaccurate. The article, with a picture of the rock shadowed in euros, described Gibraltar as a base for pirates and corsairs. The article was also highlighted by the online news publication elplural.com, which believed it to be proof that the paper was willing to mislead its readers so as to protect the Spanish foreign minister and his obsession with Gibraltar. The opposition describes the report as scandalous, with the language used reminiscent of a darker period in Spain's political history, which Gibraltarians will have been reminded of again. It adds that in the most sensationalist fashion, the Abitha seeks to make Gibraltar responsible for Spain's economic ills, attempting to tar the rock with the brushes of corruption and illegality that afflict so many levels of the Spanish political society. And it says the article is so riddled with unsubstantiated, sweeping statements and inaccuracies that it would appear that its sole aim is to slander our community. It notes that the newspaper chose to ignore the allegations of corruption made against the leaders of its own government and hopes the majority of Spaniards will see through this blatant attempt at attention diverting. For its part, elplural.com says that José Manuel García Margallo is safe in the knowledge that the newspaper will always cover his back, omitting to mention when the Abitha's founders were found hiding a fortune in Switzerland, but supporting the Spanish foreign minister, who it says has so far this year boycotted Gibraltarian journalists, censored a talk by the chief minister, and ordered the closure of the Instituto Cervantes. The front-page headline reads that Spain is investigating organised crime in Gibraltar, but there's no mention of any such investigation in the actual story. Instead, says El Plural, it puts together a mishmash of police operations that have a vague association with Gibraltar. Of the 200 operations quoted on the front page, the actual story only mentions 15, which reportedly took place over the past 3 years, and these are unknown even to the Abitha itself, which in the past has only seen fit to mention 3 of them. And even then, it adds the relevance to Gibraltar is again vague. On a favourite subject of tobacco smuggling, the Abitha quotes the figure Spain loses to this as 718 million, but then explains this is a national figure that includes Canarias, Andorra and every port in Spain. The number of companies operating out of Gibraltar is again, according to elplural.com, way off the mark. And it points out the Abitha says money laundering occurs in non-compliant jurisdictions, but fails to mention that the ROC is not one of them. The jurisdictions mentioned, says the online publication, are obviously not of interest to Abitha headline writers. The article is accompanied by an editorial which accuses Gibraltar to be a base for white-gloved criminals capable of the most despicable actions condemned by a civilized Europe, including Britain. Gibraltar, he reports, constitutes an anachronism that will never cease to be news in Spain because, among other reasons, Spain's collective honour is assaulted. elplural.com concludes by saying the fact that an editor has to explain why he writes what he does says a lot. A row over fishing with nets intensified this week, with the opposition accusing the Chief Minister of fiddling with excuses whilst Rome burns. It said the laws on fishing with nets only seem to be applied to locals. In response, Fabian Picardo said the GSD spent the better part of 12 years undermining the law, and Daniel Feetham is now trying to win favour with the anti-fishing lobby.
The GSD says it accepts that the GSLP Liberals tore up the 1999 fishing agreement when they came into office, a move which was then described by the Chamber of Commerce as a rookie error. But it says the manifesto commitment was to end fishing with nets in Gibraltar waters immediately, and accuses the government of having failed to do that in 3.5 years. The opposition says it's unseemly for the government to blame the RGP for lack of enforcement, when there was no reference to this aspect in their manifesto. It says for the GSLP Liberals to now say Rome wasn't built in a day is a lame excuse, and says a more appropriate analogy is that Fabian Picardo is fiddling with excuses while Rome burns. But in a late evening response, Number 6 said the opposition created the fishing issue they're now complaining about by entering into an illegal agreement with Spanish fishermen in 1999. The Chief Minister insists the 2011 manifesto commitment was to no longer be bound by this agreement, and that the application of the law is a matter for police. Fabian Picardo says the Royal Gibraltar Police has now been liberated from the shackles of the GSD's illegal agreement, and calls on the leader of the opposition to be clear with the electorate and state whether he is in favour of Spanish fishermen continuing to fish or not.
In other news this week, the government said it wanted to assure the public that the tender for the new dual-fired power station was only awarded after it established that liquefied natural gas could be safely delivered and stored in Gibraltar. This followed concerns from the opposition that the government committed to a project and awarded a multi-million-pound contract, while on its own admission not fully understanding the full safety implications.
The opposition says at no point has the community had a chance to hold an open and frank debate on this issue, because the government admits that not all the facts are available. It says it's only recently become clear that the government intends a private entity to build a facility at no cost to the government in exchange for bunkering rights. It reiterates it's obvious from the government's own statements that all the necessary health and safety reports were not obtained before the decision to build a liquefied natural gas installation at the detached or the North Mole was made. But Number 6 says that before the tender was awarded, a preliminary assessment study was conducted to determine that the supply and storage of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, would be viable for the port area. In January last year, it says 2 representatives from the Health and Safety Executive in the UK came to Gibraltar to assess the 2 proposed sites for the storage of LNG. The government says only after expert advice indicated that both the power station and the storage facility were safe and practical was the decision taken to proceed with the project. It points out that liquefied natural gas is stored at minus 162 degrees Celsius in a double-skinned tank in a storage facility that cannot explode.
This week we learned that the government and the Calper House trustees have bought a new set of buildings in London to create a new and improved Calper House. The new facilities for this home away from home for sponsored patients will still be a short distance from St Mary's Hospital, but the capacity will be more than 4 times the present one.
Over the past 25 years, Calper House has helped more than 5,000 patients undergoing medical treatment in London. Today, future patients received notice that they'll soon have a new place to stay in the UK capital.
Well, I think this is the beginning of a new era for Calper House, and in particular a new era for Gibraltar-sponsored patients who have to travel to the United Kingdom and need care there. So many of them are disappointed today because Calper House is such an important heart in London for the people of Gibraltar that if they are going there for the purposes of sponsored patient treatment, they want to be at Calper House, but there's only 8 ensuite rooms. It's not possible to fit everybody who's going to London, so having so many more rooms available and to a much more modern standard will be absolutely revolutionary, and I'm very proud indeed to be able to be involved with this step change in the provision of services by Calper House.
Have you had to turn down many people over the years?
Oh yes, this is the worst part of our doing was we could take about 10 families at any given time, but we have not been able to cater for everybody that really need to go over for treatment.
At a press conference this afternoon, the Chief Minister at the time the Calper House was founded spoke of how necessary a project it was 25 years ago.
We had people who were living in basements where the totally unhygienic conditions, and they were being treated as outpatients and having to go into hospital, and it was really something that needed to be dealt with.
The Gibraltar government supported the establishment of Calper House back then, and it does so again today. The new building cost £8.4 million, with refurbishment works expected to cost a further £2 million.
It's not easy to find the properties that we in fact today have exchanged on in London. Properties in London are A, not cheap, and B, very much in demand.
Well, what the government is doing here is, to an extent, stepping up as it did when Calper House started and making sure that the steps that the trustees want to take are possible and that they have the government's financial backing. As you know, at the time that Joe Bassano was Chief Minister, he pledged to match every pound that the trust raised in charitable donations with £1 from the government, and that made the acquisition of Princess Square possible. What I'm saying today is that the government is going to make it possible for the trustees to exchange contracts on Norfolk Square and to complete on Norfolk Square and be there to support them financially as they may need, but of course they do have their asset in Princess Square, which is the one that they will principally be using to finance the new acquisition.
When completed in about 2 years' time, the new Calper House will have between 33 and 36 en-suite rooms.
But always keeping in mind the philosophy of Calper House that however modern and however en-suite and independent the facilities that may be provided, this is about providing a Gibraltar away from Gibraltar, a Gibraltar in the heart of London. And so therefore there will be a lot of communal areas planned to ensure that there is interaction from all those who are in London, and that we create our own Llanito-Gibraltarian atmosphere in the heart of London for when those who may be there need it the most.
Although the government of Gibraltar is one of the main supporters in funding the running of the home, money raised through private donations is still required to make ends meet.
The people of Gibraltar, they've been very generous up to now, where every time we've had fundraising, flag days, and friends who actually pay a subscription every year, and I'm begging that more people join the Friends Association, and those who are already there to maybe up a bit their subscription, because as you correctly say, it's going to be more expensive to run, obviously. But I'm not worried in the least. I'm sure that Gibraltar will come through, as it always does for any charity, not only for us.
And we'll be back with more of this week's news after this break.